The memorial service took place at dawn the following day. Velik arrived early and found a position where he could observe without intruding on the ceremony. The humans had cleared a section of the colony square and arranged simple chairs in neat rows. 8 empty places stood at the front, each marked with a photograph and personal items belonging to the fallen soldiers. Velik studied those photographs as the other attendees arrived. Paul Griffin had been a large man with a gentle smile and kind eyes. His display showed images of him with a wife and 2 young children. Amy Norton had been younger, barely out of her initial training, with bright eyes that suggested she had found joy in her work. The other 6 faces told similar stories. Ordinary people who had chosen extraordinary service. The surviving soldiers arrived in formation. They wore clean uniforms that showed no evidence of the battle they had fought. Their wounds had been treated and bandaged. Their weapons had been cleaned and stored. But their eyes still carried the weight of what they had experienced. Commander Cole led the procession with Lieutenant Santos at his side. Both officers walked with measured steps that suggested physical pain carefully controlled. Cole took his position at the front of the gathering, while Santos joined the other soldiers in the audience. Velik noticed that the ceremony drew observers beyond the military personnel. Civilians from the colony had come to pay respects. Children who had been rescued from the school sat with their parents. Medical staff who had worked through the night to save the wounded stood at the edges of the crowd. Even members of alien species who maintained facilities on New Gardenia had come to witness the human ritual. Cole waited until everyone had settled before speaking. His voice carried clearly across the square without any electronic amplification. The morning air was still and silent, as if the planet itself had paused to listen. "We gathered today to honor those who gave everything in defense of others," Cole began. His words were simple and direct, stripped of elaborate ceremony or religious language. 8 of our brothers and sisters will not return home. Their families will receive folded flags instead of embraces. Their children will grow up with photographs instead of parents. Their sacrifice was absolute and complete. Velik observed the reactions of the human audience. Some wept openly. Others maintained stoic expressions that concealed deeper grief. But all of them listened with the same focused attention they had shown during combat briefings. Death was simply another mission to be processed and understood. Cole spoke about each fallen soldier individually. He shared stories that revealed their personalities beyond their military roles. Griffin had been famous for his cooking skills and had organized unofficial dinner gatherings that helped new soldiers feel welcome. Norton had possessed a talent for languages and had been learning Thracian as a hobby before her deployment. The stories continued for nearly an hour. Velik recorded everything, though he suspected that words alone could never capture what he was witnessing. These humans were not simply mourning their dead. They were celebrating the lives that had been lived and the choices that had been made. When the final name had been spoken, Cole paused for a long moment. His eyes swept across the gathered assembly, taking in the faces of soldiers and civilians alike. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that Velik had not heard before, something that sounded almost like pride. "These 8 understood something that many species never learn," Cole said. "They understood that some things are worth dying for. Not glory, not conquest, not power or wealth or territory. They died for strangers. They died for children they had never met. They died because they could not stand by while innocents suffered." The words struck Velik with unexpected force. He had studied species that fought for survival and species that fought for dominance. He had observed wars of expansion and conflicts over resources. But he had never encountered a species that fought and died for pure principle, for the simple belief that protecting others was more important than protecting themselves. Cole continued speaking, but Velik found his attention drifting to the faces in the crowd. He saw Corporal Bennett sitting near the front with bandages still visible beneath his uniform. The young soldier's eyes were red from crying, but his expression showed something beyond grief. It showed determination, purpose, the clear intention to carry forward what his fallen comrades had started. Lieutenant Santos sat beside Bennett with her injured legs stretched awkwardly in front of her. She held the hand of another soldier whose name Velik did not know. Their connection was visible in how they leaned toward each other, sharing strength through physical contact. Private Donna Webb had been released from medical care to attend the ceremony. She sat in a hovering medical chair with her wounded arm immobilized against her chest. Her face was pale from blood loss, but her eyes remained fixed on the photographs at the front of the gathering. These humans had suffered terribly in the past 2 days. They had lost friends and companions. They had faced death repeatedly and survived through skill and determination and pure stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Yet here, they sat together, supporting each other, honoring their dead, and preparing to continue their mission. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence that stretched across the square. Velik counted the seconds as they passed. The humans stood motionless with their heads bowed, unified in grief and memory. Then, at some signal that Velik could not detect, they raised their heads together and returned to their duties. Velik remained in the square as the crowd dispersed. He had observation reports to compile and analysis to complete. The Galactic Council expected a comprehensive assessment of human capabilities and psychology. He had gathered more data in the past 2 days than he had collected during his entire previous career. Cole approached him as the last attendees departed. The commander looked exhausted, but somehow lighter than he had appeared the night before. The ceremony had provided something that sleep could not offer: closure, purpose, a path forward through grief. "What will you tell the council?" Cole asked. Velik considered his response carefully. The truth was complex and difficult to express in simple terms. Humanity defied easy categorization. They were soft and weak and vulnerable by galactic standards. They lacked natural weapons and defensive adaptations. They should have been prey for stronger species, but they were not prey. They were something far more dangerous. "I will tell them that humanity should not be feared for what you can do," Velik said finally. "You should be respected for why you do it. Your species fights not for conquest or survival alone. You fight because you cannot accept a universe where the innocent suffer without defenders." Cole nodded slowly. Something that might have been approval flickered across his tired features. "And that makes us dangerous?" He asked. Velik thought about everything he had witnessed. The rescue of the children, the defense of the spaceport, the soldiers who had died for strangers they would never know, the memorial service where an entire community had gathered to honor their sacrifice. "That makes you the most dangerous species I have ever studied," Velik replied. "Because there is no limit to what you will endure for those you protect. There is no price too high for the safety of innocence. There is no enemy too powerful to confront when children are in danger." He paused and looked at the empty chairs at the front of the square. 8 lives spent in defense of others. 8 families who would receive the worst possible news. 8 ordinary people who had proven themselves extraordinary. "I observed humanity fight," Velik said quietly. "And now the galaxy's fear makes perfect sense. You are not monsters. You are simply incapable of standing by while innocents suffer. And that makes you the most terrifying species I have ever encountered." Cole smiled sadly at the words. It was not a happy expression, but it carried something that Velik recognized from his studies of human culture. Pride. Not personal pride, but pride in what his species represented. Pride in the values they upheld even at the cost of their own lives. "Good," Cole said. "Make sure the council understands that. Make sure the galaxy knows what happens when you threaten the people we protect. Velik promised that he would. He gathered his observation equipment and prepared to return to the research station. His report would change how the Galactic Council viewed humanity forever, and perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed. The arrival of human reinforcements did not end the battle. It transformed the battle into something else entirely. Velik watched from the command shuttle as fresh troops poured down from orbit, while the exhausted defenders finally received the support they needed. The tactical display shifted from desperate red to cautious blue as human forces began pushing outward from the spaceport. Commander Cole refused to rest despite his obvious exhaustion. He coordinated with the relief force commanders and organized his remaining soldiers into support units. His original team of 42 had been reduced to 28 combat-effective personnel. The others were dead, wounded, or too damaged to continue fighting. The Vorath had retreated to defensive positions across the colony. They still held the northern districts and had established a command post in what remained of the Colonial Administration building. Their fleet in orbit had been engaged by human warships, but the outcome of that battle remained uncertain. Velik noted that the arrival of reinforcements had changed the mood among Cole soldiers in unexpected ways. He had expected relief and gratitude. What he observed instead was something colder, something harder. The humans who had fought to survive were now preparing to finish what they had started. Lieutenant Santos limped through the defensive perimeter on her wounded leg. She gathered intelligence reports and updated tactical maps with the same focused efficiency she had shown throughout the battle. When a medic tried to convince her to seek treatment for her injuries, she simply shook her head and continued working. Later, she said. After. Corporal Bennett had been assigned to a rear position over his loud objections. His wounds from the initial engagement had reopened during the final stand, and he could barely hold his weapon steady. But he refused evacuation and remained with his unit, watching the tactical displays and monitoring communications. The Vorath commander broadcast another message. This time, the tone was different. Less confident. More desperate. The enemy offered to release prisoners in exchange for safe passage out of the system. They claimed to hold over 200 human civilians captured during the initial assault. Cole listened to the message without expression. His eyes remained fixed on the tactical display showing enemy positions. When the transmission ended, he did not respond immediately. Instead, he turned to look at his soldiers. Velik saw something pass through the group. It was not verbal communication. It was not even visible in any obvious way. But something changed in how the humans held themselves. Their shoulders straightened. Their jaws tightened. Their eyes grew cold. They want to negotiate, Cole said quietly. They want us to let them go in exchange for our people. No one spoke. No one needed to speak. The answer was written on every face in the room. Cole keyed his communication channel and responded to the Vorath commander with a single sentence that made Velik's blood run cold. You have made this personal, and you are not prepared for what that means. The assault began within the hour. Cole divided his forces into 3 groups. The main force would attack the Vorath command post directly, drawing enemy attention and resources. A second group would secure the perimeter to prevent enemy reinforcement or escape. The third group, led by Lieutenant Santos despite her injuries, would infiltrate the enemy position and rescue the prisoners. Velik requested permission to observe the rescue operation from a forward position. Cole granted the request, though his eyes held that same look of something like sympathy that Velik had seen before the first engagement. The Thracian observer followed Santos and her team through the ruined streets toward the enemy command post. The infiltration required patience and precision. Santos moved her team through collapsed buildings and underground passages that the Vorath had not secured. They avoided enemy patrols with careful timing and silent coordination. Velik found himself holding his breath as they crept closer to the building where prisoners were being held. The rescue itself was brutal and efficient. Santis divided her team at the final approach. 2 soldiers went high through an upper floor window. 2 went low through a basement entrance. Santis herself walked directly through the front door with her weapon raised. Vel. Ik heard the gunfire from his observation position nearby. It lasted approximately 90 seconds. Then silence fell over the building. Santis emerged with prisoners streaming out behind her. Men, women, and children who had been taken by the Varth stumbled into the street with tears running down their faces. Human soldiers guided them towards safety while Santis counted heads and confirmed that everyone had been recovered. The cost became clear moments later. 2 soldiers did not emerge from the building. Sergeant Paul Griffin and Specialist Amy Norton had fallen during the assault. Their bodies were carried out by their companions with careful reverence. Velik watched the humans process this loss. There was no time for proper grief. The battle was still ongoing, but he saw how the survivors looked at the bodies of their fallen friends. He saw how they touched the armor gently before the evacuation team took the remains away. Lieutenant Santis stood alone for a moment after the bodies were removed. Her wounded leg finally gave out, and she dropped to one knee in the rubble. Another soldier moved to help her, but she waved them away. "Give me a minute," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. The soldier nodded and stepped back. Santis lowered her head and pressed her fist against the ground where her friends had fallen. Her shoulders shook once, twice, 3 times. Then she pushed herself upright and resumed command of her team. The main assault succeeded while the rescue operation was underway. Cole's forces broke through the Varth defensive perimeter and captured the enemy command post. The remaining Vorith soldiers surrendered when they realized their commander had been killed and their fleet in orbit had been destroyed. The battle for New Gardenia was over. Human forces had won against overwhelming odds. But the cost had been terrible. Velik returned to the command post as the fighting ended. He found Cole standing alone in what had been the colony's central square. The commander was looking at a list of names on his personal display. The names of soldiers who had died during the battle. Paul Griffin, Amy Norton, 6 others who had fallen during the evacuation. 8 names representing 8 families who would receive the worst possible news in the coming days. Cole noticed Velik's approach but did not acknowledge him immediately. The commander's face showed exhaustion and grief in equal measure. His hands no longer shook from fatigue. They hung at his sides as if the weight of command had finally become too heavy to carry. "Do you understand now?" Cole asked without looking at Velik. His voice was quiet and rough from hours of issuing orders over communication channels. "Do you understand why the galaxy fears us?" Velik considered the question carefully before responding. He had observed 17 species across 4 galactic sectors. He had studied predators and prey, warriors and pacifists, conquerors and diplomats. He had never encountered anything quite like humanity. "I am beginning to understand," Velik admitted. "But I believe there is still more to learn." Cole finally turned to look at the Thracian observer. Something changed in his expression. Something that might have been approval or perhaps recognition. "Stay for the memorial service tomorrow," Cole said. "That will teach you more than anything else." Velik accepted the invitation without hesitation. He had come to study humanity, and his study was not yet complete. The Varth reinforcements changed everything and nothing at the same time. More enemy soldiers landed across the colony, while their warships took positions in orbit. The tactical display showed red markers multiplying like a disease, spreading through healthy tissue. Human forces were now outnumbered by a factor that made survival mathematically impossible. Velik expected retreat. Any rational species would recognize the situation and withdraw to preserve their forces for a future engagement. The Vorath controlled the space around the planet. They had overwhelming ground superiority. Continued resistance would accomplish nothing except the death of every human soldier on the surface. Commander, Cole issued orders for a fighting withdrawal toward the main spaceport. Civilian evacuation transports were still loading passengers. The humans needed to buy time for those ships to escape, even if it meant sacrificing themselves in the process. Valak found himself unable to look away from the command displays. He watched blue markers pull back in coordinated patterns while red markers pressed forward from every direction. The humans gave ground slowly, making the enemy pay for every meter with blood. They were losing, but they were losing on their own terms. Lieutenant Santos organized the defensive perimeter around the spaceport with cold efficiency. She positioned soldiers at key intersections and prepared fallback points for when each position became untenable. Her voice never wavered on the communication channels, though Valak could see the tension in her shoulders when she thought no one was watching. Private Donna Webb held a forward position near the colony's medical center. The young soldier had volunteered to cover the evacuation of wounded civilians from the facility. She stood in an exposed doorway with her weapon raised while medical staff carried stretchers past her position. Enemy fire struck the walls around her, but she never flinched. A group of children emerged from the medical center with a nurse guiding them toward the transports. They were young enough that some still clutched stuffed toys and comfort blankets. They were crying and confused and too small to understand why their world was burning around them. Vorath soldiers appeared at the end of the street. One of them raised a weapon and fired something that whistled through the air. Webb saw the projectile coming and made a choice that Valak would remember for the rest of his life. She stepped in front of the children. The explosion threw her backward into the medical center doorway. Her armor absorbed most of the impact, but blood immediately began spreading across her uniform. The children screamed and scattered while the nurse tried to gather them together. Webb pushed herself upright against the doorframe. Her left arm hung uselessly at her side. Her face was pale with shock and pain, but her right hand still held her weapon, and she was still firing at the Vara soldiers who had attacked the children. "Move," she said to the nurse. Her voice came out rough and weak, but the command was unmistakable. "Get them to the transports, now." The nurse obeyed. The children followed. Webb kept firing until another soldier reached her position and took over the defense. Only then did she allow the medics to drag her toward the evacuation zone. Valak watched the scene unfold with something approaching awe. This human had used her own body as a shield for strangers. She had accepted what should have been fatal injuries to protect children she had never met before today. The mathematics of survival had demanded that she save herself, but she had chosen differently. The evacuation continued under constant pressure. Vorath forces pushed closer to the spaceport, while human defenders fell back position by position. Commander Cole appeared at the front lines multiple times, directing fire and encouraging his soldiers with his presence. He moved through the chaos like a calm point in a storm, never rushing, never panicking. Valak noticed that Cole had not slept since the battle began. The man's hand shook slightly when he lifted his coffee cup, and dark circles had formed under his eyes. But his voice remained steady on every communication. His orders remained clear and precise. His soldiers followed him without hesitation. The last civilian transport lifted off as soldiers followed him without hesitation. The last civilian transport lifted off as soldiers followed her tune without hesitation. The last civilian station. Vorath forces breached the outer perimeter. Valak watched the ship rise through the smoke and disappear into the clouds. 8,000 civilians had been saved because humans had chosen to fight and die for them. But the dying was not finished yet. Cole gathered his remaining soldiers for a final defensive stand. They had lost nearly a third of their unit during the evacuation. Ammunition was running low. Medical supplies were almost exhausted. The Vorath had them surrounded with no avenue of escape. Velik expected despair. He expected fear and anger and the breakdown of discipline that he had observed in other species facing certain death. Instead, he watched the humans check their weapons one last time and take their positions with quiet determination. Corporal Bennett had returned from the medical shuttle against orders. His wounds were wrapped in fresh bandages, and his face was pale from blood loss, but he stood beside his companions with his weapon ready. When Cole ordered him to evacuate with the wounded, Bennett simply shook his head. "Not leaving," the young soldier said. "Family stays together." Cole looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them that Velik could not interpret. Then the commander nodded once and turned back to the approaching enemy. The Vorath attacked in waves. Human defenders cut them down in rows. Bodies piled up at the perimeter, while ammunition counters dropped toward zero. Velik recorded everything with trembling hands, knowing that he was witnessing something that would change galactic understanding of this species forever. Lieutenant Santos was wounded during the third wave. A piece of shrapnel caught her in the leg, and she dropped to one knee behind her cover. Two soldiers immediately moved to protect her, while a medic applied emergency treatment. She was back on her feet within minutes, favoring her injured leg but still fighting. The Vorath pressed harder. Human positions began to collapse. Cole ordered another withdrawal to tighten the defensive line. They were running out of space and time and soldiers. Then the sky changed. Velik saw the flashes first. Bright points of light appeared in the clouds above the battlefield. They grew larger and brighter until they resolved into the unmistakable shapes of descending warships. Human warships. Reinforcements had finally arrived. The effect on the Vorath was immediate and dramatic. Their coordinated assault dissolved into confusion as orbital fire began striking their positions. Enemy soldiers, who had been advancing with confidence moments ago now, scrambled for cover that no longer existed. Commander Cole's voice came through the communication. "Channel one final time before the relief forces made contact." He sounded tired beyond measure, but Velik heard something else beneath the exhaustion. Something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "All units' reinforcements have arrived. Push them back." The humans who had been defending moments ago now surged forward. Their ammunition was nearly gone, but their determination remained unbroken. They chased the retreating Vorath through the ruins of the colony they had died to protect. Velik understood then that the galaxy's fear was justified. These humans were not monsters. They were something far more dangerous. They were protectors who refused to stop fighting until the threat was eliminated, and the threat was still very much present. The shuttle doors opened and chaos poured inside. Velik heard the sounds of battle before he saw anything clearly. Weapons fire crackled across the settlement. Explosions echoed between buildings. Screams rose from somewhere in the smoke. Both human and alien voices mixed together in a terrible chorus of suffering. The human soldiers moved before Velik could process what was happening. They flowed out of the shuttle in practice formations, each person knowing exactly where to go and what to do. Commander Cole directed them with hand signals that Velik could not interpret. Within seconds, the unit had secured a perimeter around the landing zone. Velik remained in the shuttle with his observation equipment recording everything. His hands trembled slightly as he watched the humans advance into the burning colony. He had studied predator species before. He had seen the Kesari hunt in coordinated packs. He had watched Telluri swarms overwhelm larger opponents through sheer numbers. Nothing compared to what he witnessed now. The humans moved like a single organism with many bodies. They communicated through gestures, brief radio calls, and something else that Velik could not identify. They seemed to know where their companions were at all times without looking. When one soldier moved left, Another automatically covered the right. When the front of the formation slowed, the rear adjusted without commands. Corporal Bennett was the first to engage enemy forces. A group of Varath soldiers emerged from a burning building directly ahead of his position. The young human fired 3 precise shots before Velik even registered the threat. 2 Vorath fell immediately. The third stumbled backward and was finished by the soldier beside Bennett. There was no celebration. No pause. The humans simply continued moving forward. Velik followed the command shuttle as it relocated to a safer position behind the advancing line. From there, he could see the tactical display showing unit positions and enemy contacts. Red markers indicated Varath forces throughout the colony. Blue markers showed the human positions pushing steadily forward. The numbers heavily favored the enemy. Lieutenant Santos led a team toward the eastern residential district where sensors showed the highest civilian concentration. Her voice came through the command channel in short, clipped phrases. She reported contact with enemy forces, requested covering fire, and confirmed kills with the same emotional tone that Velik might use to order food. It was not cold exactly. It was controlled, focused. Professional. Commander Cole coordinated everything from a position just behind the front lines. Velik noticed that the commander never stayed in one place for long. He moved constantly, checking on his soldiers, adjusting positions, and gathering information with his own eyes rather than relying only on sensors. He seemed to be everywhere at once. The first serious injury occurred near the central market square. A Varath explosive device detonated near Corporal Bennett's position and sent debris flying in all directions. The young soldier went down hard, and Velik felt his own heart skip when he saw the body hit the ground. 2 humans reached Bennett within seconds. They dragged him behind a fallen wall while others laid down covering fire so dense that no enemy could advance. A medic appeared and began treating the corporal's wounds with steady hands. The whole sequence took less than 30 seconds. Velik noticed something important during that moment. The humans protecting Bennett showed no hesitation. They exposed themselves to enemy fire without flinching. They risked their own lives for their wounded companion with absolute certainty that he would do the same for them. This was not military discipline. This was something deeper. Something personal. Bennett survived his injuries and was evacuated to a medical shuttle. The unit continued advancing without him, but Velik saw how his absence affected the others. Their movements became slightly faster. Their firing became slightly more aggressive. They had lost a member of their family, and they intended to make the enemy pay for it. The tactical display updated with new information. A Vorath squad had taken hostages in a school building on the northern edge of the colony. Sensors showed approximately 40 civilians, mostly children, being held at gunpoint. The Varath commander broadcast a message demanding that human forces withdraw or the hostages would be executed. Velik expected negotiation. He expected tactical planning and careful consideration of options. He expected the humans to behave like rational beings facing an impossible situation. Commander Cole listened to the message without expression. His eyes never left the tactical display showing the school's location. When the transmission ended, he looked at Lieutenant Santos and spoke 3 words that Velik would never forget. "Get them back." Santos nodded once and began selecting soldiers for her team. There was no argument. No discussion of risks. No debate about whether the mission was possible. The humans simply accepted that children were in danger and began planning their rescue. Velik watched the assault team prepare with growing disbelief. They checked weapons and equipment with the same casual efficiency they had shown aboard the shuttle. One soldier made a joke about Varath cooking that earned several quiet laughs. Another shared a piece of candy with his companion before securing his helmet. They were about to storm a fortified position, held by superior numbers to rescue strangers. They were probably going to die. And they were making jokes about food. The attack began exactly 6 minutes after Cole gave the order. Santos took her team through a collapsed section of the building's eastern wall, while Cole's group drew enemy attention at the main entrance. The coordination was perfect. The timing was precise. The Vorath never saw the real threat until it was already inside their perimeter. Velik listened to the radio traffic as the assault progressed. Santos reported contact and neutralization of enemy forces with terrifying efficiency. Her team moved through the building like water flowing through cracks in stone. They found the hostages in a central classroom guarded by 12 Vorath soldiers. 12 soldiers should have been enough to stop a 4-person assault team. The Vorath had superior numbers, fortified positions, and hostages to use as shields. Every tactical calculation said the humans should fail. The assault took 43 seconds. When it was over, 12 Vorath soldiers were dead, and 43 civilians were being escorted to safety. The human team had no casualties. None of the hostages were harmed. Santos reported mission success with the same controlled voice she had used throughout the entire operation. Velik realized his observation equipment had stopped recording at some point during the assault. His hands were shaking too badly to operate the controls. He had watched 17 species across 4 galactic sectors, and he had never seen anything like what these humans had just accomplished. Commander Cole acknowledged the mission success and ordered the evacuation to continue. His voice remained steady. His movements remained calm. But Velik saw something in the commander's eyes when the rescued children passed by on their way to the medical shuttles. Something soft. Something warm. Something that made the cold efficiency of the assault even more confusing. These humans killed with precision and rescued with compassion. They joked before battle and wept after victory. They were predators and protectors in the same breath. Velik was beginning to understand why the galaxy feared them. A new alert appeared on the tactical display. More Vorath ships were entering the system. Reinforcements. The humans were about to be outnumbered 15-1. Velik prepared to request evacuation, but Commander Cole was already issuing new orders. They were staying to fight. Velik had studied 17 species across 4 galactic sectors during his career as a cultural observer. He had documented the hunting rituals of the Kasari predators. He had analyzed the hive mind coordination of the Telluri swarms. He had even survived 3 months among the silicon-based Morati, who communicated through controlled electrical pulses. Nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for his latest assignment. The Galactic Council wanted him to study humans. Velik remembered the briefing clearly. The council chamber had grown quiet when the human file appeared on the central display. 15 council members representing the most powerful species in known space had stared at images of soft-skinned bipeds with no natural weapons, no protective shells, and no apparent biological advantages. Yet the fear in that chamber had been real. Velik could taste it in the air with his secondary sensory organs. Humans had emerged from a quarantined death world called Earth only 60 years ago. In that short time, they had established colonies across 3 systems, formed trade agreements with dozens of species, and built a military force that made even the mighty Kasari uncomfortable. The council wanted to understand why this unremarkable species caused such concern among their neighbors. Velik accepted the assignment with professional curiosity. He packed his observation equipment, updated his translation implants, and traveled to a joint research station called Horizon Point. The station floated near a disputed border region where human and alien interests frequently overlapped. It seemed like the perfect place to observe humans in their natural professional environment. His first impression was disappointment. The humans aboard Horizon Point looked exactly like their File images suggested. They were average in height compared to most galactic species. Their bodies appeared soft and vulnerable. They lacked claws, fangs, venom glands, or armored skin. Their eyes sat forward on their faces like prey animals. Though Velik later learned, this was actually a predator trait on Earth. They moved with a strange efficiency that seemed almost lazy, until he watched them more carefully. Commander Daniel Cole was assigned as his primary observation subject. The man stood slightly taller than average for his species, with short dark hair going gray at the edges. His face carried lines that suggested frequent stress, but his eyes remained calm and steady. He greeted Velik with a firm handshake and a polite smile that revealed blunt teeth unsuited for combat. Velik found himself wondering if the council had made a mistake. This human seemed almost boring. The first week passed without incident. Velik followed Commander Cole through his daily routines and took careful notes. The commander woke early each morning and exercised for exactly 1 hour. He reviewed reports from his unit over breakfast. He held meetings with his officers where they discussed patrol schedules, equipment maintenance, and personnel issues. Everything seemed ordinary and unremarkable. Lieutenant Maria Santos served as second in command. She was shorter than Cole with dark hair pulled back tightly and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Velik noticed that she watched him constantly during his first few days aboard the station. Her suspicion was obvious, but she never treated him with anything less than professional courtesy. Corporal Kyle Bennett was younger than the others and seemed genuinely fascinated by Velik. The young soldier asked endless questions about Thracian culture, biology, and history. He shared photographs of his family back on Earth and talked about his plans to attend university when his service ended. Velik found his openness refreshing compared to the guarded behavior of most species when dealing with aliens. The days settled into a comfortable pattern. Velik observed and recorded while the humans went about their duties. He began to think that his report would be simple. Humans were social creatures who valued structure and routine. They formed strong bonds with their unit members and maintained professional standards. They were perhaps slightly more adaptable than average, but nothing that would justify the galaxy's apparent fear of them. Then the warnings began arriving. Vorath raiders had been spotted in the sector. The Vorath were a brutal species known throughout the galaxy for their attacks on civilian targets. They took slaves, stripped colonies of resources, and killed anyone who resisted. Most species avoided their territory entirely. The smart ones paid tribute to keep the raiders away from their worlds. Velik expected the humans to increase their security protocols and request reinforcements. He expected them to behave like any sensible species facing a superior threat. Instead, he watched Commander Cole gather his unit for a briefing that changed everything. Velik thought he understood. Cole stood before his soldiers with a display showing Vorath fleet movements behind him. His voice remained calm and steady as he explained the situation. The raiders had been growing bolder in recent months. They had hit 3 colonies in neighboring systems. Intelligence suggested they might target human territories. Next, Velik waited for the fear responses he had observed in every other species facing similar threats. He watched for elevated stress indicators, nervous movement, or signs of flight preparation. He saw none of these things. The humans listened to their commander with focused attention. Some took notes. Others asked tactical questions about Vorath weapons and combat doctrine. Lieutenant Santos distributed data packets containing everything known about Vorath battle strategies. The soldiers reviewed the information with the same casual professionalism they applied to routine maintenance schedules. Corporal Bennett cracked a joke about Vorath personal hygiene that made several of his companions laugh. Velik found their response deeply confusing. These humans faced a threat that had crushed entire civilizations, yet they behaved as if preparing for a training exercise. Either they were too foolish to understand the danger, or they understood something that Velik did not. The answer came 3 days later. A Kaakr distress signal arrived at horizon point during the night cycle. A colony world called New Gardenia was under attack. Varth raiders had landed in force and were moving toward the main settlement. The colony had minimal defenses and a population of roughly 8,000 civilians, mostly farmers and their families. Velik expected the humans to contact their fleet command and wait for proper reinforcements. The Varth had superior numbers and firepower. Any tactical analysis would recommend a defensive posture until help arrived. Commander Cole had different ideas. Within 20 minutes, his unit was aboard transport shuttles and heading for New Gardenia. Velik watched the preparations with growing confusion. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and equipment while their shuttles accelerated toward danger. They helped each other secure armor plates and verified communication systems. One soldier shared a photograph of his daughter with the man beside him, and both smiled despite what waited ahead. Velik requested permission to observe from the command shuttle. Cole granted the request without hesitation, though his eyes held something that Velik could not identify. It looked almost like sympathy. The shuttles entered New Gardenia's atmosphere as smoke rose from the colony below. Velik saw burning buildings and fleeing civilians on the tactical displays. He saw Varth soldiers moving through the streets with weapons raised. He saw death approaching for thousands of innocent people, and he saw the humans preparing to stop it. Commander Cole looked at his soldiers one final time before the shuttle doors opened. His voice carried clearly through the communication system as he spoke 4 simple words that Velik would remember for the rest of his life. Let's bring them home. The humans dropped into hell without hesitation. Velik gripped his observation equipment with all 4 hands and wondered what he was about to witness. The galaxy feared these creatures for a reason. He suspected he was about to learn why.